Senior Sergeant Maria Koval had been moving through the dense Carpathian fog for 6 hours, almost silently stepping over wet stones. The autumn of 1944 was cold, and sharp gusts of wind carried the scent of damp earth mixed with the smoke of distant battles. Somewhere below, about a kilometer away, a Soviet reconnaissance unit was preparing for an operation against a German garrison. Maria was not with them, and they had no idea she was there. At 27, she already had more combat missions behind her than most men in those units. Her dark hair was hidden under a field cap, and her cold gray eyes carefully scanned every meter of the slope. Her mission was separate, solo surveillance, without support, without backup, without any margin for error. 3 days earlier, she had been inserted into this area at night. Since then, she had lived among rocks and pines, surviving on dry rations and melted snow. She had studied patrol routes, marked machine gun positions, memorized shift schedules. She was a shadow. But now, everything had changed. Suddenly, her radio crackled. "Contact! Contact! Enemy shooters on the ridge! Distance over a kilometer! We can't see them!" Maria froze. A few seconds later, she was already listening more carefully. "That's too far," came the commander's voice. "We can't reach them." She slowly exhaled. Her quiet mission was over. The real work had begun. She rose from cover and stepped out of the fog, moving straight toward the group pinned against the rocks under fire. Bullets struck the stone, scattering fragments. The soldiers noticed her at the last moment. "Stop! Who are you?" one of them shouted. But she was already pulling her rifle from her shoulder. The old, reliable Mosin rifle with a scope settled into her hands as if it were a part of her. She quickly took position behind a rock and calmly said, "I'll take them." Lieutenant Ivan Gramov, the group commander, did not immediately understand what was happening. A woman, alone, appearing out of the fog. "Who the hell are you, and where did you come from?" he demanded sharply. Maria didn't even lift her eyes from the scope. "Senior Sergeant Maria Koval, Independent Reconnaissance. I've been here for 3 days. Now I'm your sniper support." "We didn't request support," someone muttered. She replied briefly, "You got shooters at over a kilometer." Only then did she raise her eyes. "Where are they?" Sergeant Petro Savchuk pointed into the fog. "Northern ridge, above us, at least 2. They're accurate, but they keep changing positions." "Any wounded?" "One. The plate saved him, but he took a hit." Maria nodded and raised her binoculars. The fog had a life of its own, covering everything, then revealing the outlines of the slopes for just a few seconds. "All right," she said quietly. "Everyone stay under cover. Do not fire." "What?" "Let them think you're pinned down. They'll relax." The lieutenant looked at him more closely. Calm, focused, as if the bullets around them were nothing. "And you'll take them out?" "If they show themselves, yes." The next minutes dragged on. The soldiers lay against the rocks. No one fired. Only the wind and distant shots could be heard. Maria didn't move. Her eyes stayed in the scope. Her breathing was slow. And then, for a brief moment, the fog parted. She saw movement, a figure, a rock, a rifle. "Contact," she whispered. She quickly estimated the distance, about a kilometer, the limit for such a rifle, but not for her. Wind, angle, bullet drop, everything was calculated in her mind. She took a slow breath, held it, and squeezed the trigger. The shot sounded dull, dissolving into the fog. A few seconds passed, like eternity. Then, the figure on the ridge jerked sharply and fell. "Hit," Maria said quietly. Silence. You, seriously?" one of the soldiers whispered. The lieutenant looked through his binoculars. "Confirmed. He's down." He slowly lowered them. "You took him out? From a kilometer?" Maria was already reloading her rifle. One down, looking for the second. One down, looking for the second. The fog rolled back over the slope, but everything had changed. Now they were no longer being hunted. Now they were hunting. The fog closed over the ridge again, as if nothing had happened. But everything had changed. The German shooters already knew they were no longer hunting without consequences. Maria lay motionless, pressed tightly against the cold stone. The rifle rested against her shoulder, her breathing steady, almost invisible. She waited. Waiting was half the sniper's job, sometimes even more. Behind her, the soldiers whispered, but more quietly now. The panic was gone, replaced by tense anticipation. "Do you think they'll pull back?" someone whispered. "No," Lieutenant Gromov replied just as quietly. "Now they'll try to find her." Maria knew that too. The second shooter wouldn't run. He would change position, try to flank, try to find the one who had just taken down his partner, and he would make a mistake. A few minutes passed. The fog began to thin slowly, not completely, only in patches, but that was enough. Maria noticed movement to the left of the previous position, another silhouette, lower, more careful, smarter. "Second," she said quietly. She didn't rush. This one already knew what was happening, which meant he would be cautious. She slowly guided the scope, leading his movement. The wind had changed, lighter but tricky. She adjusted her aim, held her breath, her finger settling on the trigger. Shot. This time, the figure didn't fall immediately. The sniper jerked sharply to the side. "Miss," someone whispered behind her. Maria was already reloading. No. She found him again in the scope. Now he was crawling, rushed, afraid. A mistake. Second shot. This time he didn't get up. "Second down," she said calmly. The lieutenant raised his binoculars. A long pause. "Confirmed, both are down." He turned to her, and now there was no doubt or questions in his eyes, only understanding. "Good," he said quietly. "Now we can move." Maria stood up first. "Don't rush," she said. "If there were more, they could still be nearby." "You think there are more?" "I always assume there's one more." That rule saved lives. The group moved forward, climbing along the rocky slope. The fog opened and closed the path, as if playing with them. Maria walked slightly above the others. She wasn't part of the formation. She was the eyes, and death at a distance. 20 minutes later, they reached an observation point. Ahead, in the low ground, lay a German camp. Several buildings, wooden fortifications, machine gun positions. "Do you see it?" Gromov asked quietly, handing her the binoculars. "I see it." Maria was already looking through the scope. "There are guards, but they're not alert. If we go straight, they'll spot us." She nodded. "3 problems," she said calmly. "Tower, machine gun on the roof, and a position on the left." Gromov narrowed his eyes. "Can you take them?"
She didn't even look away from the scope.
Yes. How long? 1 minute. He looked at his men. Get ready. As soon as she's done, we move. Maria was already calculating wind, distance, angle. First target, the observer. She held her breath. Shot. The soldier in the tower simply slumped. No shout, no signal. Second, the machine gunner. She shifted her aim. Shot. The body fell onto the weapon. Third position, several men. She chose the one standing more exposed. Shot. Chaos. Done, she said. Move, Gromov shouted. The soldiers sprang into motion, rushing downhill quickly and decisively. Maria stayed behind, on the height, with her scope. She saw everything. Germans ran out of buildings, not understanding what was happening. One raised his rifle. Shot. He fell. Another rushed toward the machine gun. Shot. He fell. She removed threats before they could become dangerous. No panic, no unnecessary movement, just work. Left flank, she heard someone shout. She instantly found the source, a soldier with a grenade launcher. He was already aiming. Shot. He fell. The grenade never left the launcher. The fight didn't last long. When it was over, only smoke and silence remained over the camp. Objective secure, Gromov's voice rang out. Maria didn't move for several more minutes, checking, waiting, searching. The silence after battle was always different, not like in the mountains before. It was a heavy silence, filled with the smell of gunpowder, smoke, and something else that lingered after every fight. Maria stayed in position for a few more minutes after the assault, not for fear, but out of habit. The last bullet always comes when you think it's over. She slowly swept the camp with her scope again. No movement, only friendlies. Clear, she said quietly into the radio. Copy, Gromov replied. Come down. She stood and began descending carefully, without hurry, as if nothing unusual had happened. When she approached the group, the Razgovor fell silent for a moment. Everyone looked at her differently now, not as a stranger, but as someone who had just pulled them out of a trap. Gromov stepped forward first. How many? He asked, briefly. 11, she replied, just as briefly. All potential threats. He nodded. No extras. I don't do extras, she said calmly. Sergeant Savchuk couldn't hold back. Listen, where did you even come from? Maria thought for a moment. I wasn't supposed to be there. What do you mean? I was supposed to observe, stay invisible. You didn't know about me because that was the plan. Gromov smirked. Well, today you definitely showed yourself. Today I had to. One of the younger soldiers looked at her with open admiration. You were taking them out like it was a shooting range. Maria shook her head. No, it's easier at the range. A few soldiers chuckled quietly. The tension began to ease. Gromov looked at her seriously. Where did you learn to shoot like that? First, basic training, then sniper school, then practice. A lot of it? She shrugged. Enough. He silenced for a few seconds. You work alone? Always. Why? Maria answered without hesitation.
That way, there's less chance of making a mistake. The answer hung in the air, and no one chose to continue the conversation. An hour later, evacuation vehicles arrived at the camp. Documents, maps, prisoners, everything was quickly loaded. Maria stood slightly aside, as always, as if she wasn't part of it at all. When the truck started moving, a few soldiers began talking again, quietly, but she could hear them. Did you see how she works? That's unreal. Where did she even come from? Like, out of the fog. Exactly, like fog. The name appeared just like that, without orders, without formality, simply among the men. Fog. Maria heard it and only gave a faint smile. The following weeks passed quickly, one operation after another. She worked alone again. Heights, forests, ruins, always alone. She was called in when situations became difficult, when the enemy was too far or too dangerous. She would appear, do her job, and disappear. And every time, the same words remained. Was that her? The fog. Yeah, that was her. They didn't see her, but they talked about her. 3 weeks later, she was summoned personally. Colonel Sergei Voronin was waiting at headquarters. Maps, photographs, and intelligence reports lay on the table. There's a target, he said without unnecessary words. A German officer, organizer of punitive operations. Maria watched silently. He's careful, always moving, but tomorrow he'll be at one camp. He pointed to a location on the map. Here. She quickly assessed the terrain.
Distance. About 1,200 meters. For an average shooter, that was nearly impossible. Even for a good sniper, it was the limit. Maria looked up. Wind? Unstable. Valley. Time? Noon. She stayed silent for a few seconds, calculating, evaluating. One shot, she said. There won't be another, the colonel replied. He looked at her carefully. Will you take it? Maria nodded. Yes. She was in position before dawn, took the high ground, camouflaged herself, became one with the rocks and earth. Hours passed slowly. She didn't move, only observed, studied the wind, the plants, the shadows. Everything mattered. At that distance, an error wasn't centimeters, it was meters. At noon, figures appeared below. Officers, guards, small shapes in the valley. She identified him by behavior, by the way others stayed close to him. She took a slow breath, exhaled, and froze. One shot, one chance. Her finger slowly squeezed the trigger. The shot dissolved into the mountains, short, dull, almost unnoticeable in the wind. And immediately, silence. But for her, time stretched. At that distance, the bullet flew long, too long. A few seconds that felt like eternity. She didn't move, didn't breathe, only watched through the scope. Below, in the valley, the figures understood nothing yet. The officer stood, speaking, guards nearby. An ordinary moment, the last one.
Then suddenly, he jerked sharply, as if something invisible had knocked the support out from under him, and fell. Chaos didn't begin immediately. First, confusion, then shouting. Soldiers ran in different directions, searching for an enemy they couldn't see. Maria slowly exhaled. Hit, she said quietly. She didn't fire again. There was no need. Mission complete. She remained in position for a long time, observing, confirming, waiting. Only when the movement below became chaotic and disorganized did she carefully begin to pack up. Slowly, without leaving unnecessary traces, as always. By evening, she reached the extraction point. They were waiting for her there.
Colonel Voronin stood by the vehicle. He didn't speak immediately, just looked at her. "Distance?" he finally asked. "About 1,200, she replied. "Hits?" "One. Enough." He nodded slowly. "We have confirmation. Target eliminated. Clean." He was silent for a few seconds, then added, "Do you understand what that means?" Maria answered calmly, "It means the mission is complete." He gave a faint smile.
Not only that. A few days later, she was called in again, this time not just to headquarters. Higher-ranking officers were in the room, a frontline map, reports, and her. Senior Sergeant Koval, one of them began, "Your shot was exceptional." She remained silent. "You operate at distances most don't even consider." "That's my job," she replied briefly. "And you do it better than others." Pause. "You will be recommended for an award." Maria only nodded. Awards had never been the most important thing to her. For several more weeks, she worked the same way, quietly, precisely, without unnecessary words. Stories about her spread from unit to unit. There's someone. A woman sniper. Appears out of the fog. And disappears. The name remained. The fog.
Before her new reassignment, she met Gromov's group one last time. The same men, the same faces, but different now. "You know what they say about you?" Gromov smiled. "More or less," she replied. "That you appear out of nowhere. That's convenient." Savchuk laughed. "You're like a ghost." Maria shook her head. "No. Ghosts are something imagined." She looked at the mountains, the fog slowly drifting between the slopes. "And I'm very real." Gromov nodded. "Yeah, and that's what makes it worse." A month later, she was transferred to another unit. New missions, new places. But the principle remained the same. Silence, distance, one shot. During that campaign, she eliminated dozens of targets at distances most considered impossible. But that wasn't the most important thing. She proved a simple truth. Limits exist only where people stop trying. Sometimes, solving the impossible doesn't require an army. Just one person who has spent years learning how to do exactly that. And when someone in the mountains said, "They're too far," others would answer, "Call the fog." And somewhere in the mist, someone was already taking position.